Well, I don't know. That's not convincing at all. I think you can do a little bit better than that. Are we ready for a lively discussion? Okay, that sounds like something you do if you're cheering somebody on to have their first sip of coffee in the morning, but I think we can do better than that. Let's clap as though Prince Rupert just got a forecast for sunny, warm weather for the next 8 months. That's sounding a little better. Now let's give a cheer as though your newly elected officials simultaneously got Prince Rupert out of debt and reduced residential taxes. All right, that's much better. So applause is welcome tonight. We encourage enthusiastic, respectful applause, but please don't shout out your comments. Once again, you can ask your questions. And now let's introduce our panel, because that's who you really want to be hearing from tonight. We have Jennifer Rice, who is our Northwest NDP MLA, North Coast NDP MLA, I should say. Don Krusel, who is the president and CEO of the Prince Rupert Port. We have Barb Fageter, who is an oceanographer and scientist. Bruce Watkinson, as I mentioned, is the fisheries manager and marine program coordinator for the Gitxaala Nation. And Herb Pond, down at the end there, is the community relations advisor for the BC LNG group. So thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. I'm going to start with the first question, and I'm going to ask each of you to respond to that first question. You will have 2 minutes each. Andrew is our timekeeper. He's there in the middle. He will flash a card to let you know when you have, I think it's 1 minute to wrap up. That's right. And he's a tough boss, so don't tempt him to crack down. So without further ado, let's go to our first question. Jennifer Rice, we'll start with you since you're closest to me. What are your thoughts on LNG in the region?
Okay, so my thoughts on LNG are that we can greatly benefit from LNG, providing that it includes express guarantees of jobs and training opportunities for British Columbians, that it gives British Columbians a fair return for our resources, and that it gets the support of and gives benefit to First Nations. And it also has to operate in a way that protects our land, our air, and our water, including living up to our climate change obligations. The speculation around LNG has created opportunities for local business, invigorated the real estate market locally. Saying that, though, it's also created some recent challenges. We're facing a housing crisis, and the municipality is faced with having to foot the bill for infrastructure upgrades to support the industry with little support from our provincial government. Ensuring local jobs will be created and that training for these jobs will be accessible are fundamental imperatives to accepting these projects. Being a fishing and salmon community, we need to know that our marine and river resources are being protected. First Nations need to be respected and included in the benefits. So overall, I believe if it's managed in a balanced way, that it protects our air, land, and water, I believe the LNG industry could work for us locals and we could benefit. And I, as the MLA for this region, will work hard to hold our government to account on these prerequisites and ensure that we get the best deal should these projects come to fruition.
To talk more about that as the evening progresses, Don Krusel, your initial thoughts on LNG for Prince Rupert?
I think LNG represents a very significant and positive opportunity for us at the Prince Rupert Port Authority. And by extension, it's a significant opportunity for this community. You know, approximately 10 years ago, the Port of Prince Rupert unveiled a development strategy that envisioned this port gateway growing from what was then about a 5 million ton per year gateway to what we anticipate a 60 to 80 million ton per year opportunity, offering a port gateway that will ship a wide variety of goods and commodities. We're well on the way of achieving this vision. Last year, this gateway handled in excess of 23 million tons of a wide variety of cargo types. And as a result of this growth and expansion, the port enterprise has created over 2,500 direct jobs, both here in Prince Rupert and right across northern British Columbia. So LNG is really just simply another addition to our diversification of this port gateway. It will add significantly to the gateway economy that is developing here in Prince Rupert. And like any other development, it will contribute to the overall economic vitality of this community and the entire region of northern British Columbia. So at the Port of Prince Rupert, we feel very fortunate to be able to be considered as the host of such a dynamic new industry and the development. And we look forward to working with the proponents, government, and the various regulatory agencies to ensure it successfully is introduced and integrated into our community. And I'm finished.
Thank you very much, Don. Sorry. All right. Barb, your thoughts on LNG for the region?
Well, like many Prince Rupertites and people who live here, I sort of feel that there are two sides to the story. However, I also feel that there's more to be said on that. On the one hand, we have a lot of economic promises about how LNG is going to bring money to our community. It's going to help repair our failing superstructures that we have in here, our infrastructures. It's going to help bring Prince Rupert back to where it was before that we can all remember. On the other hand, I see a lot of other problems associated with LNG. As a scientist, I see a lot of issues with environment. The environment is a very fragile thing in our region in some parts. We have places like Lulu Island, which is close to Flora Banks, which is a very critical salmon habitat, but it's right in the middle of development. So we have some very distinct environmental issues associated with our region. We also have a lot of issues to do with said failing infrastructure. We are going to have a lot of people coming in here that are going to be relying on what we have in order to carry on their lives, and it's not very strong right now. And where the money is going to come from to fix that is a challenge. And I also feel that there are a variety of other sort of social and economic issues around, for example, who's going to get the work, who's going to get trained for the work, whether we're going to have immigrant labor, etc., that could make LNG not quite so promising to the community. So I think LNG could be a benefit if it's in the right place, if it's done the right way with the right technology, and if it's done with a guarantee to provide jobs for local community people.
Thank you very much, Barb. Bruce, so far we have heard that everybody thinks that LNG could be a very good thing for Prince Rupert based on a couple of elements. What about for yourself and the Gitxaala Nation?
Thanks, Carolina. First of all, thanks to CBC for inviting me to be part of this panel. And they had to twist my arm a little bit, but if you know me, you know that I'll always share my opinion, right or wrong. And hopefully some of you will leave tonight agreeing with me, and hopefully some of you will leave tonight disagreeing with me. My thoughts on LNG for our region, quite honestly, I don't know what to think yet. You know, we've heard talk about the benefits for the region, and I'll talk about this later tonight, but you know, how do you define a region? And what are the real benefits? You know, from the Gitxaala perspective, what are the real benefits to our nation and to our people? That's one of the questions that we're trying to find out the answer to. And with that, what are the real impacts or the potential impacts from LNG? We're not there yet in terms of the information presented to us. Our nation, we still have a lot of questions that have yet to be answered. So I can't sit here and be as positive or as some of my colleagues or negative. Honestly, I just don't know yet. And that's one of the challenges that we face as a First Nation. You know, it's interesting times, no doubt. I mean, for my generation of Gitxaala citizens, this could be a defining moment for us in terms of some of these potential benefits and the things that we could do for our community and for our culture. But at what cost? You know, what cost? What are the impacts to our culture? What are the impacts to our way of life? What are the impacts to our rights and title? those are the questions that we want answers to. We want to find that balance point between the benefits and the impacts. You know, and in the end of the day, with the information that we want, the questions that we have, we will make an informed decision. We will make an informed decision.
Thank you very much, Bruce. And Herb, you've worn many hats in this community. Now you are representing an LNG industry. What do you think LNG could bring to this community?
Well, start by saying, I think when you introduced it, you said BCBG. Just
sorry.
small fight, but I think Bruce outlines a really perfect path. You know, there are all kinds of pieces of information that people need to assemble. For myself, what I've learned about the industry, I just see a really good fit for Prince Rupert if it's done right. We all know our past and our history. We know that, you know, whatever we've fallen from, people argue about whether we were 18,000 and we're 13,000 maybe today. After construction, we probably end up at 16,000 people, well within the number of people we're used to housing. We're used to large construction projects. We're used to seeing the entire fishing fleet. I remember back in the 80s when fishing fleet come to town. It introduces a really healthy number of high-paying jobs and really substantially bump the tax base. And heaven knows there's people vying for the job of running our city. If you look across the north and look at what communities are healthy today, they're the ones that have strong industrial tax bases. It's just the way it is across the north of British Columbia. And so I see something that, if it's done right, could be an incredibly good fit for this community and the surrounding region.
I'd like to take a point that you just mentioned, Herb, and you mentioned if it's done right. So as a proponent of LNG, what do you think is the biggest hindrance in the region to LNG development?
I don't know that there is a hindrance or a series of them. I think the challenge for putting together any one of these projects is they're incredibly large and they are complex and they're very costly. And so there's a whole series of moving parts and pieces that have to come together at the right time, you know, including and very importantly, First Nations gaining the belief in the project and feeling comfortable with it. The community at large gaining a belief in the project and feeling comfortable with it, but also market timings and labor issues, and you know, there's just a whole lot of moving parts on a very large, complex project. Doesn't mean it's not worth doing. As a matter of fact, probably what makes it worth doing is because if you land it, I can tell you the whole time I was in the mayor's office, we didn't even dream of a project that would hit this kind of fit for the community. If somebody walked through the door with one of these, I'd have gone gaga. And so to have it basically fall in our laps to see major companies interested in investing here, I think we'd be well served to make sure we do the work that Bruce is talking about, really find out about it, make sure we're making our decisions on fact, and then look for the opportunity to land the right project the right way.
Let's take this from something that Herb said, the right parts at the right time. Don Krusel from the Port, why do you think we have the right parts in Prince Rupert right now? And why is this the right time?
Well, I'd just like to expand on what Herb was saying in the sense that, like so many port projects, it's much bigger than Prince Rupert. And I mean, that's one of the, I guess, the challenges and one of the benefits of being in a port community like Prince Rupert. We're connected to the world, and it doesn't matter if it's coal or grain, potash or anything else. It's all about international markets. And right now, we in British Columbia, therefore we here in Prince Rupert, are in this opportunity period where British Columbia has a lot more gas than it is able to consume domestically in North America. And at the same time, our markets on the other side of the Pacific Ocean are hungry for that gas. And it's the right time from that perspective. But as anybody that has been reading the media will recognize, is that the window will only be open for a certain period of time. And once again, I have to compare it to so many other goods and commodities that move through this port. World markets change quite rapidly. And these are very, very expensive projects. You know, we're talking about $11 billion. That's just for the project. Another, $5 to $7 billion for the pipeline. Investors, international investors, have to have great confidence, and the timing has to be right. And the timing is right now. But given some changes in the world economy or changes in certain pricing structures, it could go by the wayside.
Interesting thoughts. And Bruce, picking up on something you were talking about taking the time to discuss whether this is right for your nation, do we have the time to have that discussion, and how important is it in terms of LNG?
Do we have the time? I don't. Under current processes and things that are the processes regulated by the BCEAO and the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, I don't believe we have the time. It takes time to understand the environment. What's going on at the Skeena Estuary? What's going on in Chatham Sound? What's going on at, as Barb mentioned, Lalou Island and Flora Bank? We cannot just cast out a couple nets and drop a couple crab pots on Flora Bank in the first week of May and conclude we know what's going on with the ecosystem. It takes time. It takes time to understand the biological, ecological trends over time. It takes time to understand the people of this area. First Nations, Prince Rupert, Port Ed area. What do they want to see? What's our vision for this area? You cannot just come in and say, we think this is good. We are going to benefit. Are you going to benefit? Are you going to benefit? I don't know. But we need that time. We need to make that time. We only get one chance at this to make the proper decision. Right? And First Nations always use, and our First Nation, the Gitxaala First Nation, always uses the principle of the precautionary approach. If we don't know the answer to something, we better find out that answer. We better err on the side of caution in case we make that mistake. Once we make that decision, once we build that first facility or the second facility, there's no going back. If we don't have the time, we've got to make the time.
We're talking about LNG and hindrances to its development in the region. Barb, Fageter, your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, I think probably the biggest hindrance that I've seen, and I'll preface this comment with the fact that not all LNG proponents are the same. There's a lot of different companies out there. They have different approaches to the way they do things. But the biggest hindrance I've seen is inflexibility in their ability to deal with what they find here. When they come here, it's a totally new situation. We're providing them with data. We're providing them with information about our community. We're providing them with knowledge about what is important to us, what are sensitive or valuable habitats to us. But sometimes they come here with a particular idea in their mind that they're going to be at a given location and it's going to look like this. And that can be a real challenging point. We can hit just an absolute wall where we have, for example, environmental data that says this site is not suitable for an LNG plant. What are you going to do about it? We just, no matter how much you want to say that we'll change this little thing, we'll change that little thing, if you're unsuitable, you're in an unsuitable site. Please choose another site. Have some flexibility.
And Jennifer Rice, your thoughts on the biggest hindrance to LNG in the region?
I think the biggest hindrance is our provincial government. Our provincial government has overpromised the LNG industry. It has raised the hopes of so many people. It's been totally blown out of proportion and turned into some big free-for-all bonanza. And I think that was a huge mistake on the part of our premier and the province.
So what is a more realistic expectation for LNG to your mind?
Well, not 17 projects for one, and not half of those projects being proposed for the North Coast. You know, we were promised a $1 trillion industry for Northern British Columbia with hundreds of thousands of jobs. We were going to eliminate the provincial debt. We were going to become like Alberta and go away with the sales tax. All of this was broadcasted by our premier and our Liberal government, our current Liberal government. And now that the election is over and the reality bomb has landed on us, we realize that this is not such a lucrative opportunity. I'm not saying it's not an opportunity. I'm just actually looking for a little, I think that we should have been way more realistic. People's expectations should have been managed, and she should never have broadcasted the windfall that we were proposed to have, because that put us in a disadvantage as far as a negotiating power. And it's no wonder Petronas was negotiating publicly through the media just recently. And yesterday we get the tax regime released, and we're getting half of what we promised. We're getting 50% of what she promised. So as Don had mentioned, he used the word, it's an addition to the other industries that go through the Port Authority. And that's exactly how I see it. It's in addition to our other industries, and it should not be at the expense of our other industries. We should not be abandoning forestry and manufacturing and mining, and definitely not fishing. And that's what's happened. It's the only thing that people have been talking about. And now that the reality bomb has dropped, we realize, oh, wait a minute. It's just part of a whole slew of potential.
Jennifer Rice, thank you very much. We have a question from the floor, and I'd like to remind you that if you do have a question to ask of our panelists, if you go back to the magazine section, you can write down your question with your name, give it to George Baker, and we will do our best to get everybody up to the microphone. Arnie Nagy has a question. Who is your question directed to?
Well, let's put it out first. I'll start off my question this way.
I can't hear him.
There
you go.
My Haida name is Talatska Sheen Hilton, and in English that means strong salmon voice. So today I'm here to carry out my name and speak for the salmon. I'll put this one right out to the floor before it comes out. LNG and natural gas is always portrayed as a clean energy, and that's how it's being sold, clean energy for the world to use. But what they fail to mention is the fact that where is this gas going to come from? It's coming from a process fracking, which threatens the environment and the headwaters of many streams in the north here. The Clapan Valley, the birth of the Nastakin we depend on here in Prince Rupert for the fishing industry is being threatened. The project on Leilu Island and the threat that it does to the eelgrass and the rearing grounds is one that's being promoted while we'll just be able to replant the eelgrass elsewhere and the salmon will move.
Arnie, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you ask your question, please.
So my question is, we can start off with Herb and anybody else who wants to answer it, Herb. As somebody like me who works in the fishing industry, how can you ask me to support a project on Leilu Island as a clean energy when the gas is coming from an area that threatens my livelihood in the spawning streams and the birth of those rivers? And secondly, the rearing habitat that we depend on for those fish to be able to get big enough to go out to the ocean and survive so we can catch them in future years. How do you think you can ask me to support a project along those lines when it's threatening my livelihood? I'm getting hit upriver, I'm getting hit lower river, and I'm putting it out here that we in the fishing industry will be one of the biggest hindrances because we cannot afford take that hit anymore. We've seen our fleet in this community being wiped out.
Thank you, Arnie.
And
We love your passion.
you think I'd be running for office? Anyways, that's my point there, Herb. If you can start off and anybody else who wants to answer.
Sure. You should run for office, Arnie. First of all, the Laylu Island, I can't really speak to directly. The company I work for chose a different site, and for all kinds of reasons. But to my knowledge, there are absolutely no intention to look at anywhere in or around Clapan or anywhere in that area for source of gas. I mean, right now, when you turn on your heated home, or you cook in your stove, or you use natural gas, it comes out of Fort St. John. It's out of territories and processes that are done in collaboration with many nations up in that area, and the First Nations people that I've talked to from that area and the leadership feel comfortable with a careful expansion of that industry, a thoughtful expansion of that industry in that area. That's the gas certainly that the project is looking at, is looking to bring. We already bring it down to Prince Rupert. We already have a pipeline coming down through a much inferior route, I would add, bringing gas down to Prince Rupert. And so these projects are simply looking to take the same gas from the same process, the same place, and convert it to a liquid by cooling it. And it's the only part of that whole process that's different is you cool it, which actually, in fact, makes it safer to store and safer to move, and cheaper to move, quite frankly, because by the time it's cooled, it shrinks by a factor of 600, and you can get a lot of it in your ship. And you can take that ship to wherever in the world you want to take it, and then they turn it back into gas by letting it warm. And as for the salmon, Arnie, certainly my voice at the table within our company, and I can tell you it echoes through to the highest level within our company, is that salmon must be protected in all of our activities. So it's in the construction process, or the operation process, the planning process. We are I would say that we probably know more about that little piece of land out on the end of the island than anybody's ever known, and we're learning more about it every day, and we're seeking to learn more about it every day, because we're taking time ahead, years away from making a decision, because we think it takes that kind of time to get it right.
Would anybody else like to respond to Arnie Nagee's question before we move on to another question from the floor? You want me to paraphrase Arnie's question? Okay, Arnie, I'm going to give this a try. I think the question is, how do you convince me to support LNG development at the potential risk to my livelihood as a salmon fisherman? Is that about right, Arnie? Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm not deeply involved in the environmental review process, but I just want to point out that the project on Laylu Island, right from the start, the entire focus of the environmental review has been to protect the salmon fisheries and the floral bank area. And the proponent has changed their design twice, and the most recent design has now, incorporates a bridge that is going to be 3 times the length of the Lionsgate Bridge in Vancouver in order to get over the floral bank, so that there is not the, other than the 2 pillars, which is on the northern edge of the floral bank and will be off the floral bank, there will be nothing touching the floral bank. And they're going to move their berth totally out to deeper water. And it's as a response to the concerns over the impact on the environment and on the fish habitat in that area, that they are going to that extent to avoid the issue. And if you can just try to visualize what a cable stay bridge of that size and magnitude, and the effort that's going to go in both in engineering and design to get around and to mitigate any kind of impact. And so I just wanted to point out that there's a lot of effort going on by the proponent to ensure that there is limited impact.
And just to be clear, you're speaking about the Petronas
Yeah,
development. Jennifer Rice.
Well, responding generally, I don't think anyone should have to sacrifice their livelihood to accept the LNG industry in BC. I think that if it can't be done properly, then it shouldn't be done. And I don't think at this point anyone is asking for the fishing industry to be shut down or severely impacted. If that was the case, if that's what the environmental assessment reveals, then I wouldn't approve that. I wouldn't approve that project going forward. And I'm just going to acknowledge that there are definitely risks with that particular project, in particular that we're all speaking of. And I think that as Don said, they're working really, really hard to mitigate the impacts, saying that there's other companies that initially looked at that site and turned away, and these are other proponents. So there's something telling me that there is a big issue right there from the start, from the get-go, since others have turned away right off the bat.
Thank you, Jen. We are going to have an intermission in just a few moments, but we're going to take one more question from the floor, and George Baker is going to ask that question. He's already standing here at the mic, being the voice of somebody else. Whose question is George?
Her businessman here in Prince Rupert. He has a double barrel question here. How will BC get more than the 1.5% tax rate that we promised right from the bat? And if we can't get more than 1.5% tax on these projects, why not leave natural gas in the ground? And that's open to anyone who wishes to answer.
Herb Pont?
Yeah, I'll start on that. I think it's important to acknowledge that the 1.5% is an additional tax above and beyond what any other business in the province is paying. So it's not like that's the tax they pay. They pay all the normal business taxes. They pay the royalties on the natural gas as it comes out of the ground, and they should. It belongs to people of British Columbia, and so again, the same as it's being extracted right now, and royalties are paid to the province, and that helps us all with schools and hospitals and everything else. They'll pay all the normal GST and PST. They'll pay, their workers will pay income tax, and they'll pay huge amounts of local property taxes, significant payments to First Nations, local government, including both Port Edward, Prince Rupert, but also all the different regional districts through which the pipeline passes. So huge brand new taxes to the people of the North and of the province of British Columbia. And then in addition to that, an LNG tax that starts at 1.5 and then goes up and up and up over time. And then in addition to that, a carbon tax. And then in addition to that, an LNG standard for performance in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, all of which are brand new sources of revenue to the people of the province. So, I mean, it may or may not be what certain politicians promised or didn't promise or whatever. I tend not to look at that. What I tend to look at as a person who lives in Prince Rupert and hopes that the swimming pool is actually going to stay open in the long run is this new money coming into my community that'll help us to keep our services alive? I came in '88 with the most amazing set of amenities that I've ever seen in a small community. And since I've arrived here, we've renewed none of them. And when the Zamboni collapsed this summer, we asked the parents of the Hockey Association to buy the new Zamboni with the fries and gravy money they raised, because the city couldn't afford to replace a basic asset. So in my mind, brand new money that helps us in communities. You can argue about the promises, or you can argue, I mean, those are legitimate arguments. I don't mind, I mean, to dismiss them. I'm just saying, as a resident who plans to live here, I welcome the thought somebody else will come along and help us to pay the bills. We all know.
Anybody else like to speak to the reduced tax rate on LNG in the province from our panel?
And I think everyone also has to recognize that oil, or the gas industry, oil and gas, the gas industry in British Columbia is already a major contributor to the economy. Remember, this province, this country only has one customer currently for that gas, and it's the United States. And the United States is going to become self-sufficient in gas in about 5 years. So conversely to thinking about, are we going to get enough revenue from the new projects? One has to think about what happens if we don't find an outlet for our gas to international markets. We will have stranded gas without a customer. The jobs and the tax revenue that's already been generated in this province will go away. The only way for us to even replace what we will lose as a result of losing the major customer in the States is to get that gas to overseas markets. And the only way to get that gas to overseas markets is to liquefy it so it can be shipped. So yes, it's a great opportunity, but if we don't do it, it's going to be a great loss. And there's going to be tax revenue lost.
About this tax reduction from the
Yeah.
province. What are your thoughts?
Sort of coming from the other side of the whole business is that when the province or the feds puts in taxes for industry, I think a lot of us have experienced this situation. There's always a loophole. And so even though I hear all this, oh, there's going to be this many taxes, well, already they've been dropped from what the original number was going to be, 7% down to 3.5. And we're going to wait for the other foot to fall on what the loopholes are. So I'm not sure that I can count on that. Promises have not been kept in the past. Furthermore, as a community resident who pays, between 20 and 30% of income tax and another huge chunk of property tax, and that still isn't enough to keep our services running around here. And we're now going to have our services being used even more by the workers that come in, our hospitals and our roads and everything else. How are we actually truly going to maintain this, especially if promises aren't kept?
I think we're going to take a wrap now for a short intermission. We will talk more about the social strain of LNG developments, how it will support our social lives here in Prince Rupert. But for a little while, let's stand up and stretch our legs. And if you want to ask a question of any of our panelists, once again, you can go to the magazine area. There's paper, there's pens. Just give that question to George Baker. And in the meantime, feel free to talk to some of our panelists or us here from CBC or amongst yourselves. And we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes, which is 5 minutes before 8 o'clock. Thank you, Russell, for keeping us in check, because Russell knows that I would just chatter away to all of you probably until 3 in the morning, but we have business to get to here. So welcome back to our LNG forum. We hope you're refreshed and raring to go. And just a reminder that we are recording this. City West is here, and they are recording this for Channel 10, and we're hoping that it will be rebroadcast. It's live right now, so don't run home and watch it, though. You can keep in your chairs. We're also recording this for YouTube, and we'll be putting this up on our website, which is cbc.ca/daybreaknorth. So if you want to listen again to a portion of it or tell your friends and family, that's where to find it. So let's reintroduce our panelists here. You've gotten a book. Jennifer Rice is our NDP MLA for the North Coast region. Don Krusel is the CEO and president of the Prince Rupert Port. Barb, Fageter, an oceanographer and scientist. Bruce Watkinson is with the Gitxaala Nation and is the marine coordinator, and Herb Pond with BG LNG. So thank you again to the library for holding this event tonight, and to all of our panelists. We were talking about the very hot issue of Petronas and the controversial site that it's been looking at off of Lilu Island. We've also had Petronas much in the news of late because they raised the issue over taxation recently, and also wanted the federal and provincial governments to take a look at the environmental assessment process. So the question that I have to direct to you next, and Don, I think I'll start with you on this one, is whether we should streamline the environmental assessment process for LNG terminals.
I think the simple answer is no. I don't think the LNG projects should be treated any differently than any other project. And certainly at the Port Authority, look at these projects no differently than other terminal development, and we should go through the same stringent environmental review process as any other process, and live and die by those processes. Simple answer.
Bruce, we haven't heard from you for a while. What do you think about the pressure from Petronas to streamline the environmental assessment process?
Thanks for that. Yeah, I promised my wife I wouldn't swear, so I didn't want to jump in and start talking about taxes earlier.
That's why you were so quiet.
Well, yeah, by the way, Aidan Watkinson, if you're watching on Channel 10, it's bedtime. I agree with Don that the EA process should not be streamlined, and I've talked about this previously. And I want to give you one more example that I haven't talked about to answer this question. The current EA process, whether it's the BC government or the federal government, doesn't consider the timelines for the First Nation governments to make their decisions and have their deliberations. In Gitxaala, we have a model that we still use our hereditary chiefs in coordination with our elected band council and our citizens at large. And we need time. It takes time and money to bring these folks together. Yeah, I'm ballparking a bit, but I think it's, to bring our hereditary chiefs together for a meeting, it's in the neighborhood of $20,000, all said and done. And if you know anything about First Nations culture, we don't make a decision overnight. It takes time to deliberate. We need to present information to our chiefs and to our people. We need to let them ask questions. We need to go find out the answer to those questions, present it back to them. They need to deliberate. They go into their houses, they go to their homes, they go with their families, they deliberate. We come back as a community again, and we have those open discussions. This takes time. So when we have these deadlines, we're going to have this chapter of the environmental assessment report out for review. You have 30 days to review it or 60 days to review it. It doesn't always consider the timelines that First Nation governments run on. There's a lot of other reasons, and we don't have a lot of time to discuss all the other reasons why the EA process should not be streamlined. With that one there, I don't think a lot of people realize. And it's a very real consideration of why we need more time to make decisions.
So I'd like to give you a follow-up question here. We've been hearing about the pressure to get LNG underway because of the global markets and the revenue that could be generated. Some of that revenue would be going to your First Nation. Is that not a consideration?
It's complicated. There's no doubt about it. This is a complicated issue. And you have to start looking at what, I'm not going to use the word sacrifice, but what we're willing to compromise on. Yes, we understand that the Gitxaala Nation, that's 2,000 citizens strong, we are connected to that global economy. And like it or not, decisions that are made outside of Canada influence what goes on within our traditional territory. But you have to look at it from the point of view in terms of what you are willing to compromise. We have probably, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here by saying we have yet to see the real benefits put in front of our nation. We're still trying to negotiate that from these proponents. What are the real benefits for our nation? And then you have to consider, those questions about the time. You have to consider those potential impacts to our culture, our way of life. And like I say, it's complicated. We don't have an answer right now today, our First Nation. So whether or not we choose, if the benefit package was some astronomical figure and we were comfortable with the information at hand, we might say, yeah, you know what, speed this up. Right now we're saying we don't have the information to basic questions. And that's the information we're looking for right now. We want to make an informed decision for our citizens, and finding that balance point between the benefits and the impacts. Believe me, I paused because I wanted to swear. It's complicated, and I'll just leave it at that.
I'd like to bring the conversation over to you, because being with BG LNG, watching Petronas put some pressure on the government to move a little quicker with processes, the provincial government and the federal government. What sort of pressure does that put on your LNG group to move a little faster, to maybe streamline things a little quicker?
None. None. I think Barb said, every company is different. We have different personalities, like every human being has different personality. Agree wholeheartedly with Bruce. We just think it takes a lot of time to build trust in relationships. It takes time for people to digest information. You do have to keep coming back. The process itself, once it becomes an official process, does have a clock that ticks away. Mm-hmm. I talked about it being a good fit if it's done right, and certainly I would say that it's been our view that part of done right is taking that in advance of starting the clock, so that by the time the clock gets started, hopefully most of those discussions have taken place. Is
there not a risk for BG LNG not to jump on the boat before it sets sail, as we're hearing from some of the other LNG proponents?
You're talking just a wee bit above my pay grade in terms of timing markets, but I can tell you what I've heard from people who have been at it for their entire careers, and in terms of our view, and that it's not, it hasn't been seen as a race. It's about timing it right. And all those many moving parts that I talked about coming together and in the right way. Certainly there's got to be a market at the other end that wants to receive it and is prepared to pay the right price, or there isn't a project. And it's very clear that, in spite of very highly qualified companies that are circling and looking at the opportunity, in the end, only a few are actually going to proceed. And so the activity now is going to narrow down as proponents sort out the magnitude of this opportunity, report it back to international boards, and go through those deliberations. But in the end, we're comfortable that the process as it exists if you work it correctly, there's room to build the time, build the relationships that are required. And that includes with the community of Prince Rupert, Port Edward.
Jenny Henderson is patiently waiting. I just want to bring this question to Jennifer Rice before we move on. What benefit is there to streamlining an EA process here?
I don't think there is a benefit to streamlining the EA process. I think anyone that's witnessed what has happened with the recent Mount Poly mine would agree that there is no benefit in deregulation or lessening the environmental assessment process. I mean, you couldn't have, Bruce so succinctly described the importance and relationship to First Nations. And we know that if we don't have First Nations consent on this, that we have no projects. And thus, why would you jeopardize and risk those relationships and thus any opportunity for LNG?
Thank you. Jenny Henderson, you have a question. Is there an individual that you'd like to direct your question to?
Everybody here that's smarter than I am. I'd like to know, why do we have to ship this stuff at all in the first place? I mean, if we've got all this technology to frack it up and it's for the benefit of mankind, why would we not just give them the technology and they can frack their home? Right? Like, why go to all this expense and trouble and manpower and resources to build this infrastructure, ship this stuff from point A to point B when we don't really need to? Thank you.
Jennifer Rice, do we really need to, guess, as part of the question here?
Well, I think Don Krusel did a pretty good job a few minutes ago sort of describing how the natural gas market is how it functions. And I think there's an important story to be told. I know Herb disagreed with me that I was getting a little bit passionate about the broken promises, but I think that's the story that hasn't been told to British Columbians, and that's the story of the fact that we've had a fairly well-regulated and successful natural gas industry in BC for the last decade. And as Don pointed out, we had one customer. We have two. We have the United States primarily, to a lesser extent, the eastern provinces of Ontario and Quebec. Less than 10% of their natural gas supply is used for domestic purposes. Now, the United States has had its own natural gas discoveries, or some bonanza. And so now we have saturation of natural gas across the global market. And so, as Don had pointed out, we don't have a customer anymore. So we need a customer. And my angry issue that I just mentioned earlier is the fact that we were promised this windfall that was above and beyond what we currently have. And now what we realize, or others have realized all along, and if I could just be a little bit partisan here for one moment, the NDP we've had to sort of suppress ourselves in the sense that we can't even elaborate on the conversation for being criticized of being too negative or the party of no or opposing all development. But the reality is that now we know to maintain our basic necessities, our basic healthcare, and our basic educational costs, we need to find a customer for natural gas. It's not this big economic windfall. It's not above and beyond what we're currently doing. We're desperate for a market, and the Premier broadcasted it, and companies are taking advantage of that. And no wonder the tax regime is way less than what was promised. I mean, the companies are beholden to their shareholders. In the case of Petronas, the shareholder is the country, is Malaysia. So, I mean, that's how the world works, and that's how it operates.
Don, since Jennifer quoted you a lot in some of those comments, I turn it to you now to address Jenny Henderson's question, which, if I can reframe it a little bit, I hope I do so accurately, is, do we really need this? Do we need to do this at all?
Well, like so many commodities that are shipped through Prince Rupert, they're based on a marketplace in Asia. And China and Japan and all of the Asian countries are expanding very rapidly. And, China in particular has a growing middle class that is 300 million people and still growing. and they have suddenly emerged, and it's a society that's quickly urbanizing. And today, well, they just need more energy to light the lights of these additional urban environments. And just like the middle class society in North America, they are looking for the same standard of living that we enjoy here in North America. And that's all driven by energy and gas. And they don't have the same resources that we have. On top of that, Japan, which recently, because of the Fukushima disaster, I guess, where their nuclear power plant was decommissioned because of an earthquake, suddenly they are looking for alternate energy sources other than nuclear energy. And Japan is a very industrial, urbanized society that now is, and they don't have any gas of their own. And so they are looking to places like North America. And I should just want to also point out that the United States, besides now not requiring Canadian gas, they are actually becoming a competitor. On the Gulf Coast, right now, they are turning what used to be import LNG facilities into export LNG facilities. And now the United States not only is going to shut off the tap for our gas, they are actually taking their gas and they're doing the same thing that we are hoping to do here, and they are going to liquefy it in the Gulf and to send their gas to international markets. And getting back to timing, it's an internationally competitive environment out there. And once again, we missed the window. Places like the United States or other, the west coast of Africa is also looking at developing gas and to service places like China and Japan and South Korea, all of those nations that are looking for gas.
I'm going to ask one more panelist to answer this question, and then we'll get to our next question from the floor. Barb, I think you might have an interesting interpretation of this on whether you think we need to have LNG here.
Well, I'm going to take a different tact, as I always do. I think actually we don't. And the reason I'm going to say this, and I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings about this, but I think people take a very short-term view as to what LNG is a solution for. It's a short-term solution for Japan. It's a short-term solution for China. It's a short-term solution for our economic woes. LNG is not forever. In fact, probably LNG is going to be for a lot less than we think it will be, because we'll be tapping it at a much greater rate than we've ever tapped it before. The actual estimates, I'm not sure yet. There's quite a few variations on how much LNG is out there. I've heard quite a wide range of it, but I suspect there's probably less of it than we really think or would really hope that there is. So these are all short-term solutions. What happens when it's gone? What happens to China's population when it's gone? Do their lights go out? What happens to Japan? Do they go back to using nuclear energy? What happens to our infrastructure that we've been supporting by LNG economics? Are we back to where we are right now, wishing we had a market and not having any LNG? And finally, what happens to us 20, 30 years down the road when we want to turn on the heat in our homes and there's no LNG?
Would anybody like to respond to Barb's perspective before we move on? Herb, do you care to?
You know, I go back to the original question. I don't think there's any reason that we have to do anything. We don't have to sell our wood products. We don't have to sell anything. We don't have to sell meat to foreign markets. We do it because we hope that we create a better for our families, create better communities, create better places to live, because people have jobs and economic opportunities, and there's money to fund hospitals and swimming pools. And I'm fixated on the swimming pool for some reason. I don't know why.
Because it's closed.
Yeah, there you go. And so we make choices. And I think tonight's forum's a great testimony to democracy at work. We make choices and we decide we're prepared to do this, we're not prepared to do that. This is where we're going to go. There are several things I think that are that are hard to argue with. I was going to use words I can't. This is a massive opportunity to bring new jobs, new revenue in our communities, and specifically into the northern communities, specifically in Prince Rupert and the surrounding communities. We can choose not to do that. I sure hope that we examine it all and have a really good look at the whole thing and make those decisions based on fact. And we've done it before, and we'll do it again.
All right, if there aren't any further comments from the panel, I'm going to bring it back to the floor. Is that okay, Bruce?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do you have a specific member of the panel you'd like to address your question to?
Yes, my name is Gary Krause, and I'm a lifelong resident of this region. I'd just like to make a short statement first. I'd like to say that the Skeena River and the area around it is our Lake Louise. It's a magnificent, beautiful beast, and I think we've got to be very careful on how we treat it and what we do with it. In regard to that, my question is to industry, and my question is how do we benchmark the cause and effect of these industries to our renewable resources, Skeena River, and who takes responsibility if the cause and effect isn't to our likings? As in regards to Prince William Sound and other big situations, basically everything goes to litigation for 20 years, and people with the most money with the most money to go to court wins. And this is my fear, is that once we get to the spot and something goes wrong, who takes responsibility?
Would you like to address that to Don or Herb first? Both. Which one of you would like to take a crack first? Don? Who takes responsibility?
There we go. Speaking from the Port Authority, our agreements, once again, I just want to emphasize that the LNG projects on port lands are going to be treated no differently than any of the other terminals. And those agreements have very clear responsibilities, and they certainly reside with the proponent and the shipper. So anything that, occurs on those lands that under those agreements, it will be the responsibility of the proponent, and something goes wrong, they're responsible. And that's all I can say. Where they're going to be treated no differently than any other occupant on port lands here in Prince Rupert, and they'll be held accountable.
Bruce Watkinson, is that enough for you in terms of responsibility for what might come after?
I think it's part of the solution. In a very broad sense, I think we're all responsible for where we live. It's kind of the old saying about, I really like that. We should build a new garbage dump. We all need it, but not in my backyard type thing, right? Well, if the area decides to go ahead with LNG development and facilities, and in some respect, we're all responsible. It's the responsibility for community groups and folks like Barb Fageter to be out there monitoring and looking at long-term cause and effects. It's up the responsibility of local First Nations to be a set of eyes and ears out on the water to again monitor long-term effects. It's the responsibility of the provincial government and the federal government, as much as they don't admit that, but it's their responsibilities. And it's everybody's responsibilities. If the legal responsibility is with the provincial government, the federal government, or the Port Authority, it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that indicators, that benchmarks have change. It's our responsibility to make sure that the legal responsibility parties are out there doing their jobs, and they're administering fines. They're shutting down these facilities. It's everybody's part, in my opinion. Caroline is not quite ready, so should I just keep rambling?
Herb, do you want to respond to the question about who takes responsibility?
Well, I think what I really would like to do is acknowledge that Gary has been one of the people that has been extremely generous with his time in helping us to understand what the important issues are, what the design factors need to be. He has been one of a number of people who have been very engaged in the process, taking responsibility early to say, if I can influence this, I'm willing to. And I think, that's exactly what we need throughout the process. We're hearing from First Nations that are interested in ongoing monitoring. That's I think, fantastic. And I think the other thing is we should really look at this industry, which has a phenomenal track record all around the world, in terms of operating the most modern fleets, in terms of having the most incredible safety processes, these are, if you're going to attract a new neighbor, these are pretty desirable neighbors. Again, you have to go through the process of deciding, do you want that neighbor? But, we could spend a lot of time naming a lot of less desirable industries that we have had and that we've flourished from. In terms of those impacts on the environment. They are world leaders in what they do. And here.
I'm going to ask you to hold your question for just one more moment, because something that was brought up at the beginning of the night that we haven't talked a whole lot about are the social implications of LNG development in the community. It would mean pressure on housing. It would mean pressure on resources. It would really change the way Prince Rupert looks. Jennifer Rice, I would like to start with you to talk a little bit about how do these projects protect the social integrity of the North Coast?
Well, I feel that this is actually one of those times where the provincial government needs to step in, and it's more their responsibility. The provincial government requests proponents to put so much money up front, and yet the provincial government doesn't do that itself. And I think that's a colossal failure. I have pressured the government so many times. I've spoken to the deputy premier, who's also responsible for natural gas, is also responsible for housing, and he doesn't feel that any preemptive measures need to be taken. And that's really, really frustrating and disappointing, because that is not planning. And we've learned we can take opportunities from other communities, from Fort St. John, from Fort McMurray, and we have an opportunity to do things differently. Saying that, we're currently on the path for the same problems that boom bust towns have, the same social pressures that those communities have experienced. And my hope is that the provincial government would have a change of heart and step in, particularly when it comes to housing. It's probably, I haven't ran the stats yet, but it's probably the number one concern that walks through my office is people being displaced from their homes, or the dramatic increases in rent, the ridiculous reasons for evictions, where people are being essentially rent evicted, and our housing minister doesn't want to do anything. And I feel we're definitely on a poor path when it comes to housing.
In a different perspective, Dawn, I'd like to turn it to you. What do you think we can do as a community to protect that social fabric?
First off, I just want to say that I don't think that this is unique to the LNG industry. It wouldn't matter what industry came to town that was of this size and magnitude, we'd have these social issues and social challenges. So it's not the LNG industry. If we had another, and should I say it, another pulp mill suddenly come and want to construct, and because that's about the number of employees that one of these facilities will have and such, and it'd be the same kind of social issues we'd be talking about. So that needs to be said. And then I guess I'd just lean on what Bruce said. I think that with the social issues, everybody's sensitive to them. Every proponent has expressed recognition that if they do make a final investment decision to start construction here, that there is going to be some social issues that need to be addressed. But I think it's a responsibility of the community to step forward and provide some leadership and some acknowledgement on what has to be done, and the community get together and make sure that we have a plan and to strategize what is important, where do we want to expend our resources to make sure that we do protect the lifestyle as best we can through that very dramatic growth period.
Herb, you have an interesting perspective, having been mayor of Prince Rupert and seen the pull on the social good of this community. Now you work with an LNG firm. We've talked about it being the provincial responsibility, the community responsibility. What about responsibility from the company? What sort of responsibility do they have to protect a community and to make sure that the people living here aren't harmed by LNG?
Well, I think a large responsibility. But it is jointly shared. It's been interesting to hear the dialogue about, we all have a stake in this, right? And I think it's important to separate out the construction phase from the operating phase. If you could snap your fingers, not go through the construction phase, and we had 400 to 600 new high-paying jobs at a well-run facility and new taxes, I think we'd all be pretty happy. It's surviving that large impact of a construction phase, and I think one of the key responsibilities the company has is where they have knowledge from other projects, where they've seen things other places in the world, where they understand what ramp up can look like and what ramp down can look like, and where they have understanding of which trades, what training, what business opportunities were winners and losers. All of those things is a huge responsibility, I think, on the company to be sharing that information in ways and means that are meaningful to people, and then allowing for the time it takes and the facilitation it takes for people to have those discussions, that they come to understand what their place is going to look like, not only getting through construction, but then what is it going to look like when you arrive at the prize at the other side.
And further to that, Lee Brain has a question that I think relates into this topic quite nicely. So Lee, do you want to ask your question, please?
This is, I think, directed more to Herb, but I think one of the burdens on Prince Rupert has been the decommissioning of the pulp mill site, and we're still dealing with that at this time. And myself, 30, 40 years from now, I'm still going to be in this community, and I'm still going to be here, hopefully in a leadership position. And I was curious if maybe you can give us some insight into what the decommissioning of terminal sites will look like, and also what decommissioning of work camp sites will look like, and how the municipality can work with these companies to ensure a smooth transition from end life scenarios.
It's every site's going to be a little bit different, but without doubt, surely to goodness, as a society, we've moved past tolerating the abandonment of a facility like the pulp mill, and all of the legacy impacts that has. In the case of our site, we're on Ridley Island. We have a landlord who will have certain demands on how we leave the site at whichever point in the cycle that we're done. And so our responsibility will be to the Port of Prince Rupert to leave the site in the condition that they deem is appropriate for the next user. But I think there are, there are discussions taking place, from all that I understand, on mechanisms can be used for industry in general, not just the LNG industry, but industry in general, so that the taxpayers protected the life of these facilities. Talk about the camps. I think the opportunity is there for a community that is well organized, well in advance, explore legacy opportunities. For example, I'm probably get in all kinds of trouble when I get in the office in the morning. I don't know, but it wouldn't be the first time. Apparently, I've survived so far. Prince Rupert dumps sewage raw into the harbor every day of the year, all year round. If you look at the studies, some of those outfalls work really well, and some of them work less well. Is there an opportunity for a legacy benefit that might help with sewage treatment? I can tell you the camps won't dump raw sewage directly into the harbor. That's a standard that no camp is going to have. They're going to have some kind of sewage treatment. Is there an opportunity? Is there an opportunity around water systems? I think that these are massive. A 3,800 man camp is a community many times the size of Port Edward. It's going to have its own fire department. It's going to have its own health care. It's going to be quite a substantial facility. So what are the legacy opportunities? We're certainly looking and initiating those conversations, but I think there's a responsibility on the community as well to be organized.
Herb, you brought up something about the landlord holding LNG developments to a certain account when it comes to decommissioning. So it seems to make sense to ask Don Krusel about what some of those expectations are around the decommissioning.
The expectations are built into the lease, and the tenant has to return the site to its original, can't plant the trees, but to take down all the infrastructure. And then the question is, well, what happens if they're bankrupt? Well, we have performance bonds built into the lease, and we have spent a lot of time in our negotiations to make sure that there's sufficient funds set aside for that when there is a need for decommissioning, it's totally taken care of.
I'm going to ask one more panelist to weigh in on this. Bruce, I know you love it when I single you out, but when it comes to the end of life for one of these LNG terminals for the Gitxaala Nation, what would you like to see at the end of all of this?
Big pot of gold? No, it's a legitimate question. Gitxaala First Nation, other First Nations on the North Coast have been here for thousands of years. And it's our goal to be here for thousands more years. So when we talk about long-term effects, it's a really relevant question for us. And I'm going to take a couple stabs at this just from the economic point of view. And, we talked about opportunities for First Nations, opportunities for folks in the local area. And one of the things that's really important to me and to others in our community is we don't just want jobs. We don't just want, well, you can get a job for a year and that's your benefit from the project. We want, if possible, we want to explore careers for citizens to become entrepreneurs, to own trucking companies, to own whatever kind of service companies that they can make a career of. One of the things that in our traditional marine economy around fishing, we always had, if I owned a boat and if I made good money, I had that to pass down to my son or my nephews. Well, we don't have that anymore. So that's one of the things that we are looking for long term out of this, is to be able to give people an opportunity to have careers and not just a job. So I want to make that distinction. But in terms of the environment, there's not much more I can say than what's been said tonight about, it's got to be, we cannot have long-term effects to our environment. We cannot have long-term effects to the health of the Skeena River, to what's going on in Chatham Sound. Because, hey, when the LNG companies leave, when the folks in the Prince Rupert Port Ed area leave, First Nations will still be here. And we need to be sustained off of our land.
Thank you, Bruce. We have about 20 minutes left here, which sounds like a lot of time, but it will go quickly. So we're going to turn another question to the floor here. Christina has been standing here patiently with a question. Is there somebody in particular you'd like to address your question to?
No, I'll just open it up to the floor.
Sure.
And this has kind of been mentioned already. Actually, was a question by one of the panelists, and I just was wondering if there's an answer out there. And it goes along what you're saying too, more long-term thinking. is what is the backup plan? So you mentioned that there's a short window that you have to be ready for because there's a lot of international competition from the US and other countries. So what is the backup plan if you miss that window? And what is the backup plan if LNG is not successful economically or it's a disaster to the environment? We've seen a lot of this in our history. Are we learning from our history and our mistakes? And are we thinking about future generations for all of this? Thanks.
Barb, we haven't heard from you for a while, so I'll turn that question to you first. What do you think?
It's almost a question that is a little meant for industry in that what is their backup plan should things go wrong. I think from a community science perspective and just a community perspective is that we need to be very clear about what we're going to get out of this if it happens, how we can use that to sustain ourselves in the long haul. And this is particularly important if it does happen, is that we use those funds that we get, we use the money that we get, not just to pay for the immediate needs that we have, but also to look forward to what we have to do in the future, how we clean up from what LNG has done, what we do to preserve the environment, all those sort of things need to be looked after. On the other hand, if LNG doesn't fly, we need to be asking ourselves, why are we dependent on mega projects again? We've been through this before in Prince Rupert. Why are we doing this again? I think we should be looking at a better way to survive.
Krusel, your response to that, a better way to survive?
Well, I want to emphasize that, at least from the perspective of the Port Authority, this isn't seen as all our eggs in one basket. LNG is just another user of the port, and it's a big user, and we're really looking forward to working with the proponents to bring them to this port. But we aren't putting all of our eggs in this basket, and we have a very diverse plan, and that's really been our plan. We want to make the Port of Prince Rupert as diverse as possible so that when the coal isn't running, the grain is running. When the grain and the coal isn't running, there could be LNG running. And when the LNG isn't running, the containers are. And that's really important. This community has been stated, has been through those booms and busts, and the way to smooth the high points and the low points out is to have diversification. And the LNG is just another commodity, another terminal to be added to the diverse portfolio that this port economy is building. And so plan B is to continue working on all of the other developments and such. Canada is a trading nation. I mean, let's not lose sight of the fact that Canada is a trading nation. Without trade, none of us would be even in this library. We wouldn't have a swimming pool, and we wouldn't have hospitals and such. That's what makes the Canadian economy tick. And we are fortunate here in Prince Rupert to have the gateway for Canadian trade into international markets. And we should be trying to diversify that gateway economy as much as possible. And LNG is just an element of a diversified gateway economy.
I'd like to hang on that notion of diversification, not having all the eggs in the LNG basket, because earlier, Jennifer, you were saying that the provincial government had too many eggs in the LNG basket. So the question to you then, what do you think should be the backup plan if LNG doesn't work out or comes to the end of its cycle? How does Prince Rupert get out of the economic cycle of dependency, I suppose?
Great, I appreciate the question. I think I want to answer it differently if I'm thinking broadly from a provincial perspective, but then as a local resident of Prince Rupert, I mean, my answer would be different. I'd kind of want to say ditto to the last two speakers, to Dawn and both to Barb, and ditto to the question that was asked, the vision question, which is so important. And I just really thank you. I really value that that question. It's a great question to ask our leadership in this province. It's a great question to ask our leadership nationally, and it's a great question to ask all those wannabe politicians locally right now.
And for you too.
And for me too. I mean, I feel like this is a panel in itself, is to go down that route, and so I feel like I'm not doing it justice when I say ditto to diversification. But I mean, I don't really feel like we have the forum for that. But I guess that's the key, is we don't abandon our other industries. And Prince Rupert is a fishing town, or it's a fish people town, because it's not necessarily just the commercial fishing fleet. There's a commercial recreation fleet, and almost nearly 50% of the community is Aboriginal here, and even if you're non-Aboriginal, there's many of us that live a subsistence or a semi-subsistence lifestyle, and so to maintain those values and stick to our guns, that we do maintain those values and not abandon other industries, and be positive and have vision for new industries.
Thank you, Jen. We're going to take one more question from the floor. And that's Des Nobles. You have a question. Is there anybody you'd like to direct your question to?
No, actually. Sorry. No, I'll leave it to anyone that wishes to answer the question. Thank you very much. My name's Des Nobles, and I've lived in the area for 42 years, and I like to think of this place as home. I'd like to think of this place as home for as long as possible. I'm also an elected official with the Skeena Queen Charlotte Regional District. And from the perspective of community, in terms of planning, I have both an obligation and a legal responsibility to my constituents to plan responsibly. All right? I can't go out and start to build infrastructure on one-time funding. I can't go out and do a whole range of things on one-time funding. Most of what I'm hearing around LNG, and to be perfectly honest, I don't want to hear any more about LNG, because my head is solid LNG. I've done nothing but LNG for the last 2.5 years. But my question to the panel is would you support a comprehensive economic and environmental assessment of these LNG projects? And I come back again to my comment about planning. For years, someone has told us that we can't continue to live off the resources that we have in the past, our fish and our forests and the little bit of mining that we did in the region. It was boom and bust. But then all of a sudden, the fund shows up and the Fed show up with oil and gas. My God, the most boom and bust thing you could ever attach yourself to. But this is our new economy. That being said, let's plan this properly, because right now, the way we're doing it, it isn't bringing our communities together. It's dividing us, and it continues to divide us day after day. Had we done this properly, in my mind, we would have come forward with these projects and said, okay, which are the most likely to proceed? Focus our attention on those. Then where would be the most likely place and the best place to put these? And we could focus on that as communities. And then we could get behind these sorts of things and actually derive some economic benefit from it. From the way I see it now, and from the rhetoric I hear from both levels of government and from other people, you know what? I don't believe there's anything in this for us anymore. So please, could you answer me that question? Could you support an economic and environmental assessment strategy?
All right, we have 15 minutes left here. So, would you support a strategic economic and environmental assessment of all BC LNG projects? Herb Pond.
Well, I don't even know what that would look like. I mean, which projects are you going to analyze? How are you going to analyze them? Which proponents? There's no question. One of the challenges that the entire process has is taking into effect the cumulative effects of the multiple projects. But I think the process as it exists is probably as good a democratic process as we're going to get to analyze those processes. As far as local and regional planning, very supportive of trying to see the communities become as clear on what they want out of not only, I agree, let's put LNG to a side for a second. If you're going to grow, where are you going to grow? What do you want it to look like? How are you going to handle sewage treatment systems? How are you going to renew the library? where do you want to be 15 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and beyond, and whether LNG goes ahead or not. Absolutely interested in playing a role. But again, it's got to be elected leaders and others that take responsibility for leading that process, but very interested in playing a role in supporting that.
What chances do you think you could have to lobby something like a strategic economic and environmental assessment process within the government?
Well, I have historically, wearing previous hats, lobbied for similar processes. We had the PNSEMA process, which was the Pacific North Coast Integrated Management Area, but we didn't have all the partners at play. The federal government didn't want to participate, and I think that's what's crucial. I mean, we could have a regional visioning and economic analysis and social economic analysis, social analysis of this whole region. But if the Port Authority chose not, I mean, I'm not saying that's a situation, I'm just hypothetically saying, if the Port Authority chose not to participate, then we wouldn't be successful. And so in theory, I'm definitely supportive of it. And I do support, there are people in this community, there are people sitting in this audience today that have been pushing for that. I absolutely, as their MLA, wholeheartedly support that notion. I feel we have an opportunity to learn, like I said, from those other communities. We don't need to be in a situation where we have a doctor crisis like Fort St. John does. We don't need to be in an economic mess like, I don't want to name communities, another community is. So we have the opportunity right now, and I wholeheartedly support notion. I mean, and that's how we create community, is we take the time to do that planning process.
Would anybody else like to respond? Don Krusel?
I don't think anyone can speak against planning. And planning is absolutely critical. However, we live in a very dynamic world. And if I could find the brake and stop the world from spinning and stop all of the economic activity from taking place and moving forward with sufficient time to plan, I'd love to reach for that brake. But the truth of the matter is everything is spinning very rapidly, and one has to just recognize that you have to plan on the go. The irony is that it was about 10 years ago, people were talking about LNG import facility on the North Coast. And here we are a decade later talking about an export facility. So while it is absolutely critical to get everybody in the same room and to plan, we have to do it while we are in motion. And because otherwise you will lose the opportunity. And so it's a very delicate balancing act of doing one's best, the community and the government and all of the agencies working together to plan as best they can while the world is in motion and things are changing rapidly. We go through a 5-year business plan at the port every year. And I can tell you last year's doesn't look anywhere, well, looks pretty similar, but there's changes constantly being made. We have to recognize those changes, and we have to plan accordingly and adjust our plan. But should have a plan to begin with, and then start adjusting it as the world's environment and our environment and the business climate here changes. And we should have a master plan to begin with.
We're talking about how quickly things change and how quickly the world is spinning, and the clock is spinning very quickly too, which means that we're going to begin to wrap things up here. I'm going to ask each member of the panel to answer a final question here. We absolutely do, and we are trying to get to as many people as possible, but we only have 10 minutes left, so we're going to get some final comments from our panelists who have been good enough to come out tonight. I'm sure you do, and you'll have a chance to talk to us afterwards, but for now, we're going to continue with asking for some final thoughts from our panelists. And what I would like to do is to look forward. We've talked about the end of these projects, we've talked about what it will take as a community, but I'd like to hear from each of you what would make this a success to your mind? So I'm going to go from the far end of the room towards me. So Herb, we'll start with you. What would make this a success to your mind for Prince Rupert?
Well, I think we would end up with the right number of projects done the right way, in a way that we feel comfortable, that we see an environment where, exactly as Bruce was talking about, people aren't talking about jobs, but they're talking about careers, where kids in school have opportunities in front of them right here or around the world if they want them, but if they want them here, and that we land there having had made choices ourselves as communities in terms of where we want to be. Clearly, to get there, we've got to do a lot of work to understand the projects. We've got to understand what the facts are. We've got to survive a very busy construction phase. We got to figure out how to get that. But in the end, if we don't end up with a better Prince Rupert than we have today, then we will have failed. The goal has got to be that we want to have a better community, a better place to live, a better place to raise our kids. It's a great place to raise kids. And I'd like to make sure that, just like people that were before us left us with some tremendous legacy assets. Like, again, when I arrived here, Performing Arts Center and a swimming pool and the golf course and, on and on. I mean, the library we're sitting in. And I'm not very happy with the legacies that we're leaving to the next generation. We haven't added to them. We haven't renewed them. We've actually left them in worse shape than we inherited them. I'd like that people in this room are remembered by the next generation as builders, as people that made a difference. And I think that's in spite of LNG, whether it's LNG that we move ahead with or the container port or other things. Let's make sure that 20 and 30 years out, we're really proud of the choices we made today.
Thank you, Herb. Bruce, your thoughts. What would make this a success for the region?
Yeah, somewhat simple question with very complicated considerations. I mean, everybody defines success in a different manner. So whether you talk about economic success or social success, whether we open up the pool for the month of September or we don't, I mean, that could be a measure of success. Getting back to where I started this conversation was about an informed decision for our community members. And I think that applies to the non-Gitxaalas that are here today as well. To me, I think that would be one element of success for us. We cannot control the global markets. We cannot control things that are happening outside of our area to a lot of extent. But in Gitxaala, we can control our decision-making process. And we know what information we want. We know what questions need to be answered. And if we get to an informed decision for our community, I think that's one measure of success. The other measure of success, I would think, for us in terms of our culture and our way of life, and Herb touched upon this, is inheritance. We talk about our responsibilities to look after our territories, to look after our resources, and it's always based on having more to give to the generations that follow. We have a certain word in our language called Gugulyansk, which basically means inheritance. It's up to my generation to be able to give that inheritance to my son's generation. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. And Barb, how do you measure success if these were to go ahead?
Yes, I think I'm going to follow up a little bit just as the two before me. I think success is best measured by what we see 50 years or 100 years down the road or 7 generations down the road from where we are today. Success means taking the time now to gather the information we need to gather, to know what we need to know to make a proper decision. It means taking the time. I know that we're being pushed by international markets, but it means taking the time to make the right decision. It means having proponents that are flexible, so that if we tell them this is not the right decision, they're willing to find out what the right decision is and move on with that. It's looking down that long-term road, saying, if we make this decision, if we make this plan as a community, 50 years down the road, we're going to have this. Or if we make this decision, 50 years down the road, we're going to have no salmon, and all our fishermen are going to be no longer able to fish, and we're going to be losing other resources. We need to be able to take the time to gather the information to make those decisions properly so that we end up down the road without the wrong decisions happening to us. And if we can't get the information, and I know as a scientist sometimes we don't, we need to be precautionary in our approaches of how we're going to take this further. We need to make sure that we give ourselves the leeway so that still 50 years or 100 years down the road, we're not suffering from bad decisions made today.
Thank you very much, Barb. John Krusel, how do we measure success with the question of LNG?
So I'll use the word balance, that and through balance that everybody, I guess there's that most people walk away in the future and believe that we have been able to balance all of the various competing interests, and that this community walks away, or it finds itself with a better economy and a better lifestyle and a better society here that it has today as a result of all of these developments. President and CEO of Port Authority, one of the responsibilities of the port is to ensure that Canadian goods and Canadian trade finds its way through the coast to international markets. And so we need to balance that as a citizen of Prince Rupert with the need to develop that in a way that this community accepts it, and this community feels that it's better community today or community tomorrow than it was yesterday. And so it's balance. It's finding that balance where everybody in 10 years, 15 years from now looks back at the decisions that were made today and says, good decisions, and Prince Rupert has made this region a better place to live.
Much, Don Krusel. And Jennifer Rice, you have the last word on what will make this a success to your mind.
I think I agree with almost everything all the panelists have said. I think that, if from a more of a local perspective, if the LNG industry creates good paying jobs, not just any job, but good paying jobs, and as Bruce mentioned, career building jobs, if the local people here are able to get the skills training or the education that they need to stay in the community and to participate and thrive within the industry, measure of success. I think if British Columbians get a fair return for their resources, I think as long as the industry respects, has respect for and benefits for First Nations people, I think as long as we have protections put in place that allow us to maintain healthy, clean, viable, livable land, air, and water. And I guess I'll just, lastly, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm going to quote Herb Pond. But as he said, the right amount of project, in summary of all those four factors, the right amount of projects done in the right way, and I would just add in the right location, is a measure of success.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists tonight for giving us a few hours of their time to share thoughts on LNG. I think there's something that happened towards the end of this evening where all of the panelists came together in agreement, and it gives me great hope that moving forward with this conversation, that with all of our competing interests, that maybe we can come to some resolution, because I think it's we're all pretty sure that we want jobs, we want a healthy community, and we want to maintain the beauty of this region. So by participating tonight, whether it's live here at the library, at home, watching this on webcast or Twitter, you are an architect in Prince Rupert's future and the future of LNG in the region as well. So if we keep talking to one another, maybe we'll keep up this feeling of agreement. So thank you again to everyone who came out tonight. You can watch it if you're so interested, again, on City West Channel 10 tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And we will keep the conversation going tomorrow on our program. Russell and I will be getting up in a matter of hours. We'll be on the air in about 9 hours. And we're going to be talking about this again and sharing some of the clips and moments.
My name is Larry Wong. I'm a retired veteran who served 2 tours in the Middle East as a soldier.
Larry?
I'm homeless now because of the housing grab. I have one of many who are homeless. I was locked out of my house while I was out shopping.
Larry,
Boarded up.
Larry, there's a very good time. Larry, there's a very good time for us to have this conversation.
You don't entitle me to a lawyer to fight it.
Now, Larry, we have been here for a lot of hours. Larry. Let's end with an enjoyment of this evening, and let's just give one last round of applause to our panelists. Thank you, everybody.